Paranormal M drags the unseen to the light. Ghostly whispers, cursed histories, and strange encounters await. Subscribe today. The shadows are waiting. And comment something. The Ghost in Room 307. I was stationed with the military in Germany years ago. My unit was assigned to a Quick Reaction Force, QRF team. Civilians always thought it sounded badass, but in reality most of our quote-unquote high-speed work involved walking endless loops around the fences of small outposts. These outposts, they're scattered around the countryside. While the U.S. tends to have one massive base, Germany was dotted with multiple smaller installations. Our task was to secure every one of them at night. Months of uneventful shifts melted together until boredom became a constant companion. One evening, someone in the team, after reading about Germany being one of the quote-unquote most haunted countries, they decided to check if any of our posts had ghost stories attached to them. And to our surprise, one of the smaller posts we patrolled was rumored to have a haunted barracks. Even better, or worse, is, well, that outpost was abandoned and was awaiting handover to the German government. No soldiers, no equipment, just empty buildings and a clock ticking toward the official return date. Naturally, we left this post for, well, at least the last on our nightly rounds. So let me tell you about the entrance. The building was old and it was pre-war construction with those beautiful German stone walls. Every entry point was supposed to be sealed, and they were, but all but one. There's one of the guys named Martinez, and he spotted a window left cracked open on the first floor. Getting through it wasn't easy. The sill was high, and it took two people to boost the first man in. We managed. Inside, the air was cooler than outside, unnaturally still. We cleared the building like we would any other. Basement, first floor, second floor, attic. And then, finally, the third floor, where the supposed haunting had taken place decades earlier. Rumor had, a soldier once left room 307 after waking up to see a little girl standing at the foot of his bed. The reports were real. Two soldiers 20 years apart. Same room, same story. The girl even had a name whispered through the ranks. Lena. First encounter. The hallway on the third floor was narrow. It was creaking softly under our boots. Only one door was ajar. 307. We cleared every other room first, then circled back, and the door was yawning. It was like it had been waiting for us. I think they mean that it was opening slowly. So we joked around, took a couple of pictures, and survived 307, somebody whispered with a nervous laugh. Me, I couldn't resist pushing buttons, so I said it out loud and slow. Selena. Everybody froze. You could feel the air change, like the building was exhaling. A faint thump echoed down the hallway and no one moved. The NCO whispered, "Do it again." Lena. This time it wasn't a thump. It was something softer, like a breath, a tiny mm-hmm from the hallway. We didn't even coordinate. The NCO and her female officer, Shaw, bolted toward the stairs like they were escaping a burning house. I remember catching up halfway down with their boots hitting the floor so hard it echoed like gunshots. When we reached the first floor, they must have went through the wrong window, and I had to yell, second floor, before they spun around and took the stairs down properly. Outside, breathing the cold night air, the world snapped back into focus. We laughed like idiots trying to shake off the static of what just happened. Moving on to attempt number 2. Soldiers are stubborn, and we went back in. Same window, same stairwell, same dead silence. At the top of the stairs, the building groaned. We approached room 307 like kids sneaking into a haunted house they swore they wouldn't. Well, everybody stared at me. "Fine," I said. "Lena." From the hallway came the sound of a child giggling, clear as day. I stacked on the door with my rifle ready, and John, my buddy, crouched below me, mirroring every move like somebody out of a Scooby-Doo, but with guns. Not very Scooby-Doo-y. In the dim light I caught it, a flash of a small leg disappearing into the shadows. It was 2 doors down. I thought I was seeing things until John muttered, "You saw that too, right?" My heart steadied weirdly, like a pendulum finding rhythm. Calm on the outside, storm on the inside. "Do it again," someone whispered. I swallowed. "Lena." This time the voice was right in the middle of the room, and a small, airy yes came back. We exploded down the stairs, and I don't think my boots touched half of the steps. I dove through that window at one clean leap, tucked and rolled, and came up running. First one out, no shame. The next section we're going to call the pictures. Back at the main post, still laughing and shaking it off, we loaded the photos into an old desktop. At first, just us posing stupidly in front of the building, then something changed in the series. In the 3rd floor window, there was a shadow. Next photo, 2 shadows. Next, a clear outline, one tall, one small. A man and a child, both pitch black silhouettes framed by this faint light bleeding through the opposite windows. And then nothing. In the last few shots, they were on the 2nd floor, right above our heads. The very last picture, they were gone. A month later. Life moved on. I rotated off QRF. Across the street from my new barracks was another building, one of the annexes. A soldier named Tom lived there. One night without warning, he packed up and moved into my barracks. No incident report, no noise, just gone. I cornered him days later, but he wouldn't say a word, and not until a few beers and a long Saturday night happened. My phone's saying I have less than 5% battery. Well, that is scary. I cornered him days later, but he wouldn't say a word, not until a few beers and oops, I said that already. Anywho, he said he woke up to a little girl standing at the foot of his bed, and she giggled and then floated backward into the wall and vanished. Tom didn't sleep there again. Guess what number his room was? 307. Different building, same floor plan. Epilogue or conclusion, whichever takes your fancy. Believe it or don't, that's your call. But I didn't embellish a word, and if anything, I've left out details. There was a part 2 when we went back, but nothing happened that time. No whispers, no giggles, just the same quiet hallway and the sound of our boots. But that night, on the 3rd floor of an empty German barracks, well, that's the night I started to believe in the paranormal. I believe. Whispers in the kitchen. My father passed away right before New Year's a few years ago. To be honest, losing him didn't shatter me. He hadn't spoken for nearly a decade. And, well, the relationship has been deeply damaging. When I was a teenager, I went into foster care and lost all ties with my family. And what hurt more than losing him was losing the father I should have had. That's a whole other story. After his death, something unexpected happened. I was reconnected with a distant aunt that I really hadn't known since I kept my childhood dog. I was reconnected with a distant aunt I hadn't known. That I hadn't known still kept my childhood dog, excuse me. I had believed I'd never see her again. And she was a golden retriever and a husky mix, gentle, bright-eyed, and the one steady love I had as a kid. When I placed her in foster care, I lost everything, and most painfully, I lost her. The day I found out she was alive, I dropped everything and drove hours to bring her home. She was frail and her fur matted and thin. Her tail was crooked and teeth were worn down. Her joints were stiff with arthritis, and there's years of neglect and they were etched into her body. No vet care, mange, heartworms, hip dysplasia. She'd spent a decade outside, winter and summer, and that night the temperature was below freezing. If I hadn't gone, she wouldn't have made it. I did call animal control on that aunt. Nothing came of it. They had money and influence. Well, I did have something else at least. The love for my dog, and, well, for 9 short months she lived like the queen she always should have been. She passed away from cancer the following winter, and just a few weeks before Christmas. Even though it was like a mercy that she didn't suffer long, I still carry a weight of grief and guilt that I couldn't save her sooner. Not long after she passed, strange things began. And started quietly. At night, my husband and I would hear the familiar scraping of her nails on the kitchen floor. It was the way they always sounded when she'd sort of ease herself up to follow me. For several nights, that sound echoed through the house, and at first it was comforting, and then it just wasn't. A cold, uneasy feeling settled over me. I've always been sensitive to, and whatever exists between the worlds. I've had sleep paralysis, I've had vivid dreams, and that prickling sense of being watched ever since I was a child. This time it felt sharper. One morning as I walked into the kitchen, I noticed the usual messy pile of unopened mail on the table. One folded envelope caught my eye. Something about it felt wrong. The room was still, but I watched as that piece of paper flipped itself open, slowly, deliberately. No windows open, no breeze, but my breath caught and I backed away. When I returned minutes later to grab my lunch from the fridge, that same piece of paper lay directly in front of it, as if it were waiting for me. The air felt heavy, not like the warm, soft dog, but this felt hostile. Couldn't explain it. I spent days replaying possibilities in my head, and then it struck me. My father's death anniversary had passed, and for the first time I hadn't thought about him at all. I remembered the letters he once sent me, and years after I left home it read, "I won't die until we make amends." But he did die, and we never did that. That night I shredded the letter, and it felt like slicing away the last thread he held. Standing in the kitchen, I spoke out loud, firm and steady. "You're not welcome here. Leave me alone." And just like that, the scratching stopped, the weight lifted, and I never felt him again after that night. Even now, little things do still happen, like a whisper in the corner of my mind or a flicker on the edge of my sight. But they are different and they're softer. I like to believe it's my girl still guarding me. My dog. So when the night gets too quiet, I sometimes imagine her curled up beside me, keeping the darkness at bay. The Voice in the Shed. Sorry, I'm sitting on some weird leather couch and it sounds like it's... Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. Like I was saying, the voice in the shed. This probably, maybe close to a decade ago it happened. Maybe even a little bit more. I can't quite remember the exact year anymore. My grandmother lived a couple of hours away from us. Quiet harbor town in the north end of South Island. That's when I was a kid, and weekends often meant long car rides with my parents and my sister, singing along to the radio while heading down the winding coastal road to visit her. Her property sat on a slope that faced the water. There was the main house where she lived, a tiny guest cottage just off to the right. It was used to be used by fishermen, I think, decades earlier. A stretch of empty ground between them where she stacked driftwood and burned garden waste. But what always caught my eye was the old shed tucked at the far edge of the property, half hidden behind a leaning fence and a few overgrown bushes. And it was big, about the size of a small garage. It was built from weather-beaten timber with a tin roof that rattled whenever the wind picked up. My grandmother told us not to go near it. Not because she believed in ghosts or anything dramatic like that, but simply because it was old and damp and slowly falling apart. She said the floorboards could give way any day, and one winter afternoon when the air smelled like wet earth and firewood smoke, curiosity finally got the better of me. My parents had gone back to town for the day, leaving me alone with Grandma. She was taking a nap and I was restless. The padlock on the shed door was sort of rusted through. I fiddled with it until it snapped loose in my mind. The door moaned on its hinges and I pushed it open. A settled-down door. Inside, it was dim. It was colder than the air outside, like stepping into a cellar. Dust floated in thin shafts of light from the crack in the roof. There's an old workbench against the wall, scattered with broken tools and jars full of nails. I remember turning slowly, trying to take it all in, and then it happened. I felt something press against me, like a sudden weight in the air, and it was thick and heavy in a voice. It wasn't clear at first, more like a radio station out of tune. Deep and rough, like a man's voice. Like my voice. It forced its way through the silence, cutting sharp and clear on the second word, and it either said, "Get out," or "Get up." I couldn't tell, but whatever it was, it didn't sound friendly. My heart slammed to my chest, froze for a second, scanning the corners of the shed, but there was nothing, no shadows, wood, or dust. No footsteps, no movement, no one. I bolted outside, slammed the door shut, and didn't tell my grandmother when it had happened. A few years later, the property was sold. The shed was torn down, replaced by a sleek modern house with floor-to-ceiling windows and stone fences. Every time I pass by that road now, I think about that moment. I've never been somebody who buys into ghost stories. I think there's probably a logical explanation, or a trick of the light, or a gust of wind. Maybe even the groan of the old beams bending in the cold. But even now, after all these years, that voice is one of the clearest things I've ever heard. Still can't explain it. When my dog barked at the invisible. I once rented a small cottage at the edge of town. Kind of place that looked harmless in daylight, but creaked at every corner once the sun went down. I never saw anything out of the ordinary with my own eyes, but my puppy sure did. At least he acted like he did. The cottage was old, and one floor with peeling paint and stubborn windows. I was fresh out of college, proud of living alone for the first time. I was working at a quiet little bookstore, and not many landlords in that town liked dogs, but this one didn't care, so I took the deal. My pup, a shy golden retriever, skittish and sweet, came home with me. She didn't trust people at first, but after a few weeks he kind of stuck to me like a shadow. There's 3 nights I'll never forget. Even now, more than 2 decades later, they still make my skin feel all weird. Prickle. The first bark. One evening, I'm curled up on the old sofa with my TV humming softly while he gnawed happily on his squeaky toy near my feet. Living room opened straight into the kitchen, narrow dining space. Out of nowhere, the squeak stopped and he lifted his head and, ears stiff, eyes locked on the dining room. A low growl vibrated in his chest. I'd never heard him make that sound indoors before, and then came the barking. Deep, sharp, and getting louder. I froze, staring into that dark corner he was fixated on. Every creak of the house suddenly louder, and after a long minute he calmed down, went back to his toys as if nothing had happened. I tried to laugh it off. Just old pipes, old house, I told myself. I didn't change the channel for the rest of the night. The toy that shouldn't be there. Another night, I woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of claws pacing against the floorboards. Soft growl, too. He was by my bed and alert, and I told him to lie down, but instead of settling, he dropped something on the floor. Made me sit up. Never left his toys in the bedroom, and I reached down and felt him tug a rope, and the one only he liked if somebody else held the other end. It was damp, as if he'd just been playing. I think what you mean to say is sticky and gross, but I'll let it pass. Anybody who's touched that end of the rope knows what I'm saying. The room was cold and still. I switched on a lamp. No one was there, just me and him, or at least that's what I hoped. The window. Last night was the worst. I just let him out into the yard for his usual bedtime sniff around. Then I heard it, frantic barking, louder than usual. I hurried to the big window in the dining room, pushing aside the thin curtains I'd hung up mostly for decoration. He's right there, pressed up against the glass with his hackles raised and barking not outwards but inwards. Excuse me? His eyes weren't on me, they're fixed on something behind me. I turned around so fast I nearly slipped, but there was nothing, not a sound, no movement, just the kitchen and the faint hum of the fridge. My heart was pounding. He yanked the back door open and he bolted inside, stopping a few steps as if he's sniffing something I couldn't sense. He stayed tense for a good minute before finally lying down. His eyes kept darting to that dark corner in the kitchen. And that was it for me. I started looking for another place the next morning. We moved out a few weeks later. Sure, everything that happened could probably be explained logically. Old house, wind, creaky floors, coincidence. But he lived in maybe another 9 years after that. Apartments, houses, storms, and silence. Never barked at thin air again. Boy, do I look forward to my late night sniff around as well. Damn you, couch. The Night of the Blue Jay. This happened several years ago, and even now I've only told a handful of people. One of those stories that sits quietly in the back of your mind. Heavy, but strangely comforting. I went to a small university, the kind where everybody knew each other by name. And during winter break, a girl from campus passed away, and she took her own life. The email from the administration felt cold, but the silence on campus afterward said everything. She had been somebody people actually knew. A couple of months later, I started seeing a guy I'd met briefly before. This time, though, we kind of clicked right away. Things moved gently and naturally. Then a mutual friend told me something that made my chest tighten. His ex-girlfriend was a girl who had died, and I didn't know what to say. I just remembered the quiet that settled over me when I heard. Not long after, one night he completely broke down in my arms, told me everything that... They'd broken up months earlier, but they stayed close because he was worried about her. He said he'd spend the evening with her the night that she died and left before she made that final choice. She cried like he was unraveling and held him until the sun came up. That night something changed, something in me. I went home and cried too, and I didn't know this girl. I was angry at her and heartbroken for her and guilty. Guilty for being with him. Guilty for feeling anything at all. Eventually, I went out onto my tiny balcony. It's the one spot where I could breathe. I spoke to the night air as if she might be there listening. I told her I didn't want to disrespect, what she'd mean to him, that I'd treat him gently, and I was sorry that she had suffered alone. I even asked her if it was okay for me to even be in his life, and then I started to feel something. At first it was subtle, a shift in the air when I was at his apartment, kind of presence I couldn't explain. Then the dreams began. At first it was just a field of wild daisies, and then the same yellow house again and again, and one night she appeared in the doorway of that house. We didn't speak, but we saw each other. It was like being acknowledged by a stranger I'd known in another life. Well, I thought if I was losing it, that might make sense, honestly. I didn't believe in ghosts, though. But one night at a bar, a friend told a story about a haunted hallway in their own dorm, and I finally admitted, quietly, I thought I was being followed by someone who wasn't alive anymore. My friends listened, and as I was talking, every single one of us got goosebumps at the same time. It wasn't cold, it was just real and too real. Later that night, back at my balcony, I realized something had to change. I couldn't keep holding on to her story like it was mine, so I said goodbye out loud and thanked her for listening. I told her that she mattered, and even to somebody who never got to meet her. The next morning I stepped outside again, and my balcony faced a small stretch of grass, and lying right in the middle of it was a blue jay. I panicked at first because it was quiet and my hands were shaking, but when we searched it up later, we found that blue jays are often seen as messengers between worlds. Some say a dead one means the spirits finally moved on. Years later, I still think about that winter. Never told a guy, how do you even say something like that? Hey, I think your ex has been watching over me. But I'm grateful she did, because that presence softened something in me. I don't fear spirits anymore, and in a strange way I hope my loved ones will visit me too when they go. The Woman at the Bus Stop. I have quite a few stories to share, and since for as long as I can remember, my family and I have had unexpected visits from people who've long passed away. Most of the encounters happen inside our own house, and usually makes it harder for others to believe them. This one was different. It happened in the middle of the afternoon at a bus stop, and I wasn't even alone. It was late May 2019, just a few days before final exams. It was the graduation day for the seniors at my high school. After the ceremony, students were free to go home early, and I was a second-year student then and didn't feel like hanging around, so didn't want to watch people take pictures. Me and you both. So I decided to head straight home on the early bus. Only a few students had the same idea, and most were still inside the school taking group photos or signing yearbooks or something. When I reached the bus stop, there was already somebody there. A woman who looked to be in her late 70s, and she wore a light gray coat, a little bit too big for her frame, I'll admit. They leaned on a wooden walking stick. Not long after I sat down, she began talking to me. She asked if it was graduation day, since there were so many students by the school gate. I said yes, and her face brightened up, and she told me how she had graduated from this very school decades ago, back when it had only been one building and no parking lot. She mentioned she had once dreamed of becoming a teacher. Conversation flowed easily, lasting around 5 minutes maybe. I occasionally glanced toward another student, a younger boy who had arrived shortly after me. He didn't say a word, but was clearly listening to everything. Then the bus came into view, slowly making its way down the hill. I turned toward the road, watching as it approached. It couldn't have been more than maybe 7 seconds. When I turned back to ask if she needed help getting on, the bench beside me was empty. She was gone. I scanned both directions. Up the hill would have taken at least several minutes to walk, and down the slope wasn't much quicker either. No way she could have moved out of sight that fast, especially with a walking stick. The boy's expression confirmed it wasn't just me. Wide eyes, frozen posture, like somebody trying to make sense of something impossible. They quietly stepped onto the bus, and on the ride home, the thought struck me. If she had truly been in one of the earliest graduating classes, she would have been well over 120 years old that day. The night at the inn. In the late summer of 2016, my father passed away after a long illness. 4 of my 5 siblings and I were able to travel to this tiny town of Mason, Texas. It was to be with him in his final days. If you've ever been to Mason, or even just driven past it, you know it's a quiet, almost sleepy place. Barely over 1,000 residents. One diner that closes by 8 p.m. and a single blinking light at the crossroads. It's more like a pause on Highway 87 than a destination. The house where we all grew up was small and now crammed with too many of us. I decided to stay at a little roadside inn in Junction, about 30 minutes away. Every day for nearly 2 weeks I made the drive to Mason, spending as many hours as I could with my family, trying to hold on to the time that we had left with Dad. Eventually, as it happens, each one of us had to return to our old lives. The narrator had to lean forward and plug in his phone. So, my younger sister and older brother stayed behind with him until the end, leaving that night knowing that I wouldn't see my father again in this world. Hardest thing I've ever done. My flight out of Boston was early, and I had to leave the inn around 3 p.m., or rather a.m., make the 2-hour drive. So I returned to my room early that evening, hoping for a few hours to rest. Sleep didn't come, and my body was exhausted and my mind restless. Sometime after 11, I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake by something I couldn't explain. I opened my eyes to the dark room and immediately felt it. A presence. The air seemed thick and the silence heavy. I felt exactly like somebody was standing at the side of the bed watching me. My heart started pounding, and slowly I pulled the blanket down from over my face, forcing myself to look. And there, between the shadowy light from the window and the foot of the bed, was a figure. Not clear, but dark and motionless. I whispered, "Oh, no, 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 no." I yanked the blanket back over my head like a terrified child. I told myself, it's just grief, it's exhaustion. But then the bed moved. I felt the weight of somebody sitting down at the edge near the feet. My feet. The comforter pressed heavier against my legs, and that was it. I shot upright, tossed the covers off, and blurted out, "Nope, no way, absolutely not." I paced I paced around the room. I was trying to steady my breath, trying to convince myself I was alone. The clock on the nightstand glowed just after midnight. I decided there was no way I was closing my eyes again. Opened the mini fridge, found a bottle of soda, flipped on the TV. Called my wife to tell her everything. My voice was shaking more than I wanted to admit. At 3 a.m., I'm at the front desk checking out. The night clerk, a friendly woman, probably in her 20s, smiled politely when she saw me. When I told her what had happened, her expression shifted and she leaned in a little and lowered her voice. She said she wasn't surprised. She'd often heard footsteps in empty halls. Doors creaking open on their own, too, and, well, what unsettled her the most was the sound of somebody softly humming near room 7. I was in room 7. I paid, I thanked her, I drove off into the dark highway toward Austin. I've had my share of strange, unexplainable moments at home, but that night, in a roadside inn far from everything familiar, was different. That one stayed with me. The visitor on the stairs. This one is another piece from the strange puzzle that is my grandparents' land. If you're not familiar with what's gone down here before, don't worry. I've mentioned it in other posts. Like the one about the black figure by the barn. My grandparents' house is pretty big. There's a wooden staircase in the middle of the house, and one way leads straight down to the cellar. The other goes up to the second floor. When I was younger, I always slept in what used to be the playroom, now my cousin's room. That's upstairs, and, well, late at night, the old floorboards, they would groan, and I'd usually brush it off thinking it was just my grandmother's wandering around before bed or something. She often did check on us, quietly opening doors, tucking in the blankets, asking if we needed water. I got used to hearing the door to my room ease open slowly, and most nights I didn't move, half asleep and pretending not to notice, and it felt safe back then. But as I grew older, the sound of those footsteps changed. They started stopping at the end of the hallway, and I'd feel it, that cold, prickly feeling that something's behind you. It's like someone's breath barely touching the back of your neck. And like the dumb little kid I was, I'd force myself to ignore it and roll over and pray for sleep. One night my cousin and I were still awake, giggling over dumb videos or something. We were whispering about crushes and acting like teenagers that we were, and I froze and said, "Shh, did you hear that?" The familiar creaking began, slow, heavy, and deliberate, step by step up the stairs. Went down the hall and right toward her door, and I exhaled slowly. Trying to convince myself it was Grandma, the knob twisted and the door opened. A soft, dragging sound happened. No one stood there, and I didn't dare look away. I swear I heard the floorboards inside the room dip with each step. It's as if somebody was walking closer and closer, and the air felt heavier, and then, just as slowly, the sound turned back toward the door. It closed with a faint click. The creaking descended the stairs again. When it was finally quiet, I turned to my cousin with her face being pale like chalk with her eyes wide. She had heard every step. Even now, whenever I stay there and the house starts getting this late-night singing, I wonder all those checks. I thought they were Grandma, but were they even really her? Maybe it was something else climbing those stairs after dark. It wasn't me. The Whispering Mask. I'm somebody who's always been more in tune with strange things. I wasn't a believer at first, not even close. But after a few strange experiences that piled up over time, I stopped brushing it off as just my imagination. There is one story, though, that I'll never forget. It was the first time I ever truly felt something other than, well, me in the room. For the sake of privacy, the people in this story will be represented with letters. The friend who plays the biggest role will be G, and the second friend will be J. Good job. This happened a few years ago. I was still close with both of them. Jay lived in another state. We'd FaceTime almost every week, though. G lived just a few streets down. We saw each other all the time. And I was a collector, not of anything haunted, just cute stuff. At that time, I was 14, and I just started collecting little plush toys and figures from my favorite games and shows. One night while we're talking and playing a mobile game together, G suddenly said, "Hey, I have this mask from a Halloween event. It's kind of creepy. I don't want it anymore. You want it?" I hesitated for a moment. The piece from my collection did sound exciting, so I said yeah. Before I could even ask when to pick it up, G hung up, and a few minutes later there was a knock at the porch door. When I turned on the porch light, all I saw through the glass was a porcelain mask leaning against the frame. There was a shadowy figure behind it, too. My heart nearly jumped out of me. And when I heard G's voice laughing nervously and apologizing, opened the door and still confused how they had biked all the way to my house that late. I forced a smile anyway. I thanked them and they handed me the mask. It wasn't just creepy, it looked wrong. The surface was cracked in thin spiderweb lines. The white paint faded to a yellowish tone like old teeth. The inside had a musty smell, like it had been sitting in a damp attic for years. I tried cleaning it several times, but the smell didn't go away. I placed the mask high on the top shelf of my tall shelf. That way my little brother wouldn't be messing with it. And that is when these odd things started happening. At first it was small stuff, objects shifting slightly out of place and books slipping from the shelves. My room feeling colder at night. And then that familiar tingling in my fingertips began. Something I'd later learn always happened right before, it showed up. One night I'm on FaceTime with G. I'm eating a late dinner. Something happened that made my blood freeze. The mask, which was propped up securely on the shelf, flew forward and landed in my lap with a dull thud. It's as if it had been thrown. G's voice cracked through the phone. Why did he just stop talking? He looked terrified. When I explained, she freaked out as much as I did. I put the mask back, pretending it was a one-time thing. It absolutely was not a one-time thing. That's what they all say. And a few nights later, I'm lying in bed surrounded by my usual mess. Empty water bottles on the nightstand and pillows everywhere. Out of nowhere, the mattress beneath me tilted from one corner with a force so strong it sent bottles clattering to the floor. My heart was pounding as the bed slammed back down. I lay there paralyzed, unable to scream, staring into the darkness. Even my fan had gone silent, like the whole room was holding its breath. I eventually ran to my mom's room in tears. When my dad checked, there was nothing, no cat, no person, no explanation. But the worst part came later. I started feeling watched all the time. When I used my phone camera, strange swirling strands of white would flood the screen, but never show up in the actual photo. Then came the voices, and always from the closet. One day I left my phone on FaceTime with Jay when I stepped out. And when I came back, Jay was pale and shaking. "Why were you calling my name from your closet?" she said. I told her I hadn't been there. She swore she saw a tall black figure peeking out. And then, as if to prove her right, a soft glowing orb drifted across the screen on my end, and we both saw it. The weeks after that were unbearable. Clothes went missing, and something slammed my closet door shut while I was changing. Even my ex started getting strange messages from an unknown number that mimicked my speech. My cousins, being reckless, used a spirit box one afternoon. The voice that came through called itself Edward, and said my name, and it said closet, and it said mine. That night, my mom insisted I get rid of the mask. I tied it in a plastic bag, and I set it near the back door. Next morning, gone, tossed out with the trash. And just like that, everything stopped. But sometimes, late at night, I swear I still see the corner of my closet shift in the dark. And sometimes when I walk past a mirror, I catch a glimpse of someone else looking back at me. The Black Dog by the Field. As I've mentioned before, I've got plenty of stories to tell you. But the one I'm about to share, it still haunts me. I don't know what I saw, or can't even be sure if it was really like a hellhound. Hellhound. For context, this happened on my grandparents' land, a place with a long history of strange and heavy things. Some of it isn't my story to share, but I can tell you this. The property used to be even bigger, and part of it was sold behind the family's back decades ago. Another section where a natural spring was got taken by the government for reasons no one fully understood. What's left was divided among my great-grandparents' 3 sons. One betrayed the family, another turned to share into a farm and later a small clinic. The last portion became my grandfather's place, where 2 of his sons built their homes. A lot of unsettling things happened across those lands. My cousins and I grew up hearing whispers about strange encounters. And we have seen what you might describe as unexplainable lights. And I've caught ghostly figures in photos, and some of my cousins even played with Ouija boards out there. Against everyone's better judgment, but I've got countless stories from that property. Lead March, other great-grandmother, had just passed away on her own in the hospital. All family had gathered up to stay for the funeral. My grandparents had this old truck that we called the Boda, or Bauda. Don't ask why, it's just what we called it. I was just about to ask you that. That night I volunteered to drive the Bauda along the gravel roads through the open fields and patches of woods to drop off my cousins after dinner. As I neared my first cousin's house, I suddenly slammed on the brakes. And there on the grassy hill, maybe 60 or 70 feet ahead, was something that made my stomach drop. Only way I can describe it is by comparing it to the Rottweiler that we once had in the property. And that dog was huge, chest-height when standing on all fours. What I saw that night was 3 or 4 times its size. The creature's body was thick and solid, covered in a coat of pitch-black fur. Its shape was eerily similar to a Rottweiler. Powerful shoulders, strong stance. Except unnaturally large, and its eyes 2 faint but burning red dots watching me. It moved slowly, crossing the hill without making a sound, and melted into the line of trees. I looked at my cousins, and my face must have been ghost white, and, "Did you see that?" I whispered. They stared back at me confused and said, "See what?" And they answered almost in unison, too. Not a single one of them had noticed it. I dropped them off and drove back alone, gripping the steering wheel so tight my hands hurt. My heart was pounding the entire way through the empty, dark fields. The next night after the visitation, all of us cousins decided to go back to that same field. Maybe to make sense of what I saw. Maybe just to escape the weight of the funeral. The moon was bright and my cousin thought it'd be funny to turn the headlights off while driving on the boda. "We can see just fine," and she laughed. A few seconds later, we hit a deep ditch. The truck shuddered to a stop, throwing us forward. My cousin scrambled out, yelling me to help push. I was frozen, crouched in the corner with my heart racing. That was the night after I saw the black dog, and deep down, something in me knew it wasn't just a stray. When spirits stay close. I wanted to start this story with a lighthearted tone. Ghost encounters often get painted as terrifying events, but maybe it's time we look at them differently. A few of us had this conversation in another corner of the forum. We were encouraged to bring it here so everybody can share their thoughts, so here it is. Honestly, most of the ghost hunting teams you see on TV, and quite a few in real life too, they aren't the kind of people I'd hang out with. They storm into places with all their equipment blazing, barking orders like they're in charge. "Tap once if you hear me. Tell us your name. Prove you're here." But here's the thing. Most spirits, setting aside some exceptions we'll get into later, are still people. Their bodies may be gone, but their thoughts and memories and emotions remain strikingly human. If your grandmother visits, it's still her, and if your best friend's spirit lingers around the old house, still your friend. Many who've communicated with spirits say the same thing. After leaving the body, most souls let go of small grudges, jealousy, or bitterness. And with their newfound freedom, they often see how deeply everything's connected. And that shift often brings more kindness, not less. A spirit must visit a place they loved or return to somewhere they once disliked, maybe to find closure or simply because it's familiar. It's rarely about being trapped. Sometimes they just like to be nearby, and after passing, many stay close to the people they love, hoping that they can offer comfort. And yes, it seems they can sense when you're thinking about them, which might be why their visits often come when you miss them most. Now imagine this from their perspective. You're standing, floating, next to the person you love. They're drowning in grief, convinced you're gone forever. That's while you're right there trying to hold their hand in your own way. They can't hear you, can't see you, and can't feel the way you whisper in their heart. So you try to make something move, or a lamp flicker, or a book shift. Their eyes widen, and instead of feeling comforted, they panic. They tell themselves it's just a trick of the mind. The wall between you grows thicker, but you keep trying. Maybe you place their lost ring where they can find it. Maybe you nudge the radio to your song. Maybe you leave a butterfly in their windowsill. If it eases their pain, that's a victory for you. A small way to still love them. Then there are the ghost tours and investigations. Most people on those tours aren't there to connect. They want a thrill. They talk to spirits like they're toys, not people. And often, these are the very homes those spirits once built with their own hands. They laughed there, raised children, cared for pets, watched seasons change. Then strangers arrive, tearing up walls and repainting rooms, and finally charging tourists to march through your home shouting at you. Wouldn't you be frustrated too? Worse, if you died unexpectedly. Every single night they'll drag your worst memory back into the air. They'll ask, how did you die? Like it's a game. Were you killed? Is your killer still here? And just like that, the shadow of that person, the one who hurt you, gets called in too. Because when people think of someone in spirit, they might just show up. The living do this night after night, and they then wonder why the energy shifts. Why something gentle turns sharp. Of course it does. Nobody wants to be treated like an exhibit. That's why I appreciate one show in particular, Kindred Spirits. Amy and Adam approach spirits with empathy, and they remember that ghosts are, at the core, still people. If you ever encounter one, try treating them the same way that you treat a living person, with kindness, respect, a little bit of patience. Don't interrogate them like they owe you a performance. Ask gently, but accept silence too. When there's mutual respect, something beautiful happens. Instead of fearing each other, you might just build a quiet, unexpected friendship. One that can cross time and space at the speed of thought. The swing that wouldn't stop. I was 11 when it happened. It's one of those summers where my family made the pilgrimage back to my mom's side of the family on the East Coast. I was used to traveling. I was used to airports and used to cars and you just name it. So when I heard we were leaving our calm little Virginia town for the noise and neon of Brooklyn, New York, I didn't think much of it. That is, until the 3-hour car ride loomed over me like a prison sentence. My mom grew up in Brooklyn. She hadn't been back in years, not since I was about 5. And this trip was her idea. Apparently, it was time to see Aunt Renee again. The air outside felt heavy and it felt wet, like stepping into a warm towel. I liked it though. Humidity was weirdly comforting, like the world was giving me a hug. But then the buzzing started. Mosquitoes, the eternal nemesis of every East Coast summer. I bolted into the car before they could claim me as their buffet. The ride itself was rough, and my cousin Kayla, who was 7, hummed herself and made random noises in the back seat. I knew she couldn't help it. She was on the spectrum, but my 11-year-old brain wasn't exactly patient. Her little sister Mia, 5 years old and endlessly repetitive, decided I was her favorite audience. Do you miss me? Do you miss me? Do you miss me? Till I finally said yes. And I've never really been good with little kids. I can't say no to their requests, no matter how ridiculous. After an hour, my phone died, and it was tragic. I tried to nap, and my mom and my aunt blasted music so loud the car practically shook, and I trained myself to sleep anywhere. Planes, trains, even through turbulence. So eventually, I drifted off. I woke up outside of a brick apartment building in Brooklyn, Aunt Rainey's place. Stumbled inside and collapsed on the couch without a word, and the next morning, I met my cousins again. Jalen, tall and confident at 12, and Marcus, younger at 9 but bursting with energy. Jalen towering over me by a good half a foot at that, which was kind of unfair since he was only a year older. That afternoon, somebody suggested we take the subway into the city. I'd never been on one before, and the chaos of it and the screeching brakes and packed cars and vendors shouting was overwhelming. We wandered Manhattan, eating pretzels and hot dogs from stands that smelled both amazing and slightly suspicious. Later that night, 10 o'clock, pitch black, we ended up at the playground near the apartment. I tried to argue against it since playgrounds at night are objectively creepier than haunted houses, but nobody seemed to listen to me. The place felt off and quiet in a way that wasn't normal for a city block. We shrugged it off, climbed the monkey bars, started talking. That's when I noticed it. There's a little baby swing over there, and it's moving on its own. And it wasn't just a gentle sway, it was like swinging like a kid was still in it. The problem was the last mother and child had left like half an hour ago. Jalen, look. He squints. Well, that's weird. He hopped down and he approached the swing. The second he got it, slowed to a dead stop. like it had been caught, and he reached out, touched the seat, and yanked his hand back like it burned. It's warm. Just like somebody's just been here. I climbed down, my heart thudding, and then Jalen froze again. He touched a bar in the jungle gym and said, "This one's warm too." But neither of us had been near it. We stood there, two kids with no good explanation, until we both came to the sudden unspoken conclusion. The park was not empty. We decided the place must have been haunted by kids, and made sense in sort of a grim way. Playgrounds attract both joy and danger, and maybe something terrible had happened here, and their spirits just never left, playing forever, night after night. And when we finally left, I couldn't shake the feeling of the small invisible hand wrapping around mine. It was my first ghost encounter, and it taught me something chilling. Maybe the afterlife isn't pain or peace, it's boredom. Eternal, restless boredom. But hey, that's all behind me now, right? The Fog Man of Hollow Pines. So first off, I swear to you, we weren't trying to summon anything creepy. Ghost hunting wasn't the plan, and honestly, me and my friend, who we're just going to call Ivy for now, just wanted to do some witchy nonsense for fun. We came prepared with crystals, incense, dried herbs, seashells, and even a random jar of cinnamon. We thought it might be magical. The idea was silly, but what happened was not. We started by sprinkling salt in a circle around us and laying down a blanket that doubled as our quote-unquote altar. On it, we placed our shiny little quartz collection and a couple of seashells to keep the good vibes. Ivy was hoping to get clarity on her situationship. She wouldn't call it a boyfriend. Situationship. Earlier at a cafe, we'd already done some DIY tarot readings with a homemade deck, and shockingly, they gave us answers that hit a little bit too close. Still, I thought it was all play pretend. Once the salt circle was set and the incense smoke curled in the air, we decided to go further. I suggested contacting the spirits of the forest. Since, well, it was already in the quote-unquote plan. We shuffled the deck, set it down at the altar. From the start, we said out loud, "No negative energies, only protection, only safety." I wasn't buying into it at all until the air shifted. It was like something massive just standing there watching. I turned to Ivy to ask if she felt it too. She said it first. "There's something behind me." Strange thing is, we both described it the same way. A towering man-shaped figure made of black fog, limbs stretched too long to be natural. And that detail still makes my stomach twist round. We asked the cards if it was real. Answer, yes. We asked if it was right behind Ivy. Yes. We asked if it had bad intentions. Absolutely. And at this point, the wind picked up like the forest itself was whispering at us. We tried to push the thing away with salt and rosemary. The cards told us it was definitely masculine, which matched the heavy, dark presence pressing in. Ivy reminded me of how earlier we'd been ranting about women's rights and toxic masculinity, and maybe this thing had been lurking since then. The idea gave me chills. We tried asking other spirits instead, but the vibe got kind of worse. The cards spoke in half-threats, and it felt like the fog man was circling our salt barrier. That's when leaves behind ivy rustled like something had stomped down hard. Except nothing was there. No rock, no squirrel, nothing, just movement. The forest, it didn't like us. That much was clear. When we asked straight up if we were welcome, the cards went from maybe to leave. Nice pun, Forrest. Did we listen? Of course not. We stuck around to take pictures like idiots. The sky went from bright to storm dark in minutes, and thunder started rolling in. The second we left the pines, the rain crashed down so violently our shoes filled with water. Hair plastered, clothes soaked. We stumbled out half laughing, half panicking. Ivy swore it was the forest punishing us. Thought maybe it was the opposite. Like the rain was cleansing us and scrubbing off whatever filth the fogman tried to cling to us. Either way, one thing's certain. I don't think either of us will step foot in that forest again. And you would be surprised at how much liquid high tops can actually keep in there. Just poured mine out, well, an hour ago. Don't ride motorcycles with an umbrella, by the way. Let's talk doors. No, not the ones in your grandma's house that creak and probably lead to her weird button collection. I mean the forbidden doors inside Emperor Jin Shu Huang's tomb. Sealed passageways so secret even the ghosts allegedly need a key card to get through. According to the records of the Grand Historian, the tomb includes mechanized doors and hidden compartments, which, for 200 BC, sounds suspiciously like the ancient Chinese were building smart homes before Elon Musk's ancestors had even figured out fire. These weren't just basic slabs of stone. They were traps and mechanisms and gates within gates. Basically, the tomb is less resting place and more underground escape room designed by Satan. The archaeologists today have only mapped a fraction of the tomb complex, and even that has yielded passages that literally go nowhere. Dead ends, walls behind doors, hallways that loop and disorient. But ancient texts describe 3 gates to the soul, hidden thresholds said to test truth, fear, and loyalty. Sounds like a video game boss battle. That's because Emperor Jin turned death itself into a dungeon crawl. One of the most baffling finds are stone hinges buried beneath a collapsed corridor near pit number 2. Hinges, like for a swinging door, but no actual door, just the mechanism, perfectly preserved, almost modern in design. Historians think that these were meant to be pressure activated. Others say the doors were removed, or more chillingly, never meant to open again once sealed. And this is where the whispers start. In 2007, an underground scan team noticed anomalies, metallic signatures that didn't match any known burial materials behind a thick stone wall in a restricted section. The area was labeled Zone 5, and since then it's been locked down tight. No further scans, no press releases, and the local guards were armed and theories unleashed. Some say it's a control room, that the tomb isn't just a grave but a machine, and these doors lead to its interface. Others believe they conceal Shin's true body, cryogenically preserved in ancient chemicals. Because why not throw science fiction into this already banana story? And more conservative theorists think the doors lead to vaults of lost knowledge or scrolls or artifacts, forbidden tech wiped out by the great book burning and hidden away. But the wildest theory, the doors are tests. One for the loyal, one for the traitor, and one for the uninvited. This comes from a little-known Taoist manual found in a private collection in Hunan. It references a heaven lock system used in tombs of the divine emperor's lineage. 3 doors, each with a riddle. One grants access, one triggers death, and one never opens again. And to this day, not a single door in the central mound has been excavated. Not because we can't, but because we won't. Because every time we get close to just cracking one open, well, something goes wrong, like a malfunction or a freak storm. A new reason to delay. One archaeologist called it the tomb's patience, as if it's waiting for someone, not just anyone to enter. So the doors stay sealed, but maybe, just maybe, they're listening. Okay, let's get real spooky. Tonight we enter the twilight zone of archaeology, where scientific instruments start acting possessed, and the earth itself might be exhaling secrets. Because now we're talking about the tomb that, according to multiple independent freaked-out researchers, breathes. Yeah, breathes. Let's rewind to 2012. When a joint Sino-European geological team set up a camp near the main mound. Their mission, simple environmental monitoring. But what they found was anything but chill. Every 29.5 days, like clockwork, their instruments recorded micro-pressure pulses in the soil around the tomb. Not earthquakes, not groundwater shifts, something gentler and rhythmic and measured, almost like lungs expanding and contracting. Now, before you roll your eyes and yell, "Bad data," hold up, these weren't amateurs. They recalibrated and reinstalled and retested, and still on a lunar cycle they found consistent air shifts in the tomb's surrounding soil. One scientist described it as the mound inhaling the moonlight. That's when the legend of hounds perked up. You see, in certain ancient Taoist traditions, tombs weren't just graves, they were living organisms. Designed with geomantic precision, they were said to draw chi energy, like life energy, from the heavens and the earth, syncing to celestial rhythms. Basically, the tomb was a battery, and the first emperor, he was the payload. Here's the kicker. The data gets spicier. Infrared scans during these cycles show slight temperature anomalies inside the mound itself. Hot spots and cold spots moving like currents beneath the earth. Not dangerous, but definitely alive, and every time somebody tries to publish on it, well, the studies disappear and websites go offline, and one professor called it government-sponsored ghosting. So why the question? Isn't it the tomb breathing? It's like, why? So let's entertain a few theories. One, thermal pocket theory. The Mercury rivers heat and cool, creating a thermal pump effect. Logical, but boring, so moving on. Two would be structural resonance. The tomb's design with its underground chambers might interact with tidal forces, especially with Mercury's density, like a low-tech ancient bellows system. Three, dark energy capacitor. Okay, this one's straight from conspiracy TikTok, but it's too juicy not to share. Some believe the tomb houses a geomagnetic engine powered by mercury and crystals and feng shui alignment that absorbs cosmic energy. And those lunar cycles, maintenance mode. The tomb isn't resting, it's charging. 4. Soul containment. The Taoists believed breath and spirit were linked, and in some extreme interpretations what we're seeing isn't just airflow, it's the Shen, the spiritual echo of Emperor Jin, rising and falling like a heartbeat. And here's something even creepier. Every documented peak of this breathing cycle aligns with an odd event. A landslide in 2015 that exposed ancient stone near the southern flank. A lightning strike in 2018 that hit the tomb's perimeter wall. 2021, a drone malfunction that ended with the drone flying by itself into the center mound and crashing hard. Recovered footage showed nothing, just darkness until the last frame. A single clay eye staring straight at the lens. Coincidence? Or a tomb watching us, waiting for something? Maybe it's not asleep, and maybe it's meditating. Let's shift gears and talk about the people still guarding the tomb. Not the terracotta army, not ancient booby traps, but the modern sentinels. Because yes, the Chinese government has people assigned to protect a 2,200-year-old mound of dirt around the clock. And if you think that job is boring, buddy, you haven't heard the whispers. They call themselves the Night Watchers. Officially, they're just security staff and archaeologists and engineers. But unofficially, these are folks who have seen things. The ones who patrol the perimeter of Mount Lee under cover of darkness. Flashlights flickering and radios crackling and hearts pounding like drums in a horror movie trailer. Over the years, more than a few have broken rank to leak stories. Most of them anonymously, some never again. Let's start with the footsteps. Numerous guards are reported hearing footsteps, slow and deliberate and measured on gravel paths outside the excavation zones. Always the same pace and always behind them. And when they turn around, there's never anything, no footprints, no signs of movement. Just a windless silence that presses on the ears like a held breath. Then there's the whistler. One retired guard recounted a pattern. Every full moon at around 3 a.m., soft whistling could be heard from inside pit number 1. The tune was unrecognizable and the source was unknown. When he tried to record it, the tape came out blank, except for the final 10 seconds where a voice whispered his own name. He quit the next day and moved to a mountain village with no cell reception. Can't say I blame him. And how about the light phenomena? Floating orbs, glows from within sealed pits. One researcher in 2003 called what looked like torchlight flickering beneath the tomb mound on a thermal camera. The temperature spike matched body heat. Let that sink in. Body heat inside a sealed, unexcavated chamber. The official response is environmental anomaly, which is code for please stop asking before we all get fired or vaporized by an ancient soul garden. Then there's the most bone-chilling tale of them all, the Black Sentinel. Multiple accounts describe a figure seen near the perimeter on moonless nights. Tall and motionless, wearing what looks like ancient armor. He appears only briefly and then vanishes. One guard said he saw him standing at the gates unmoving and staring. When he looked away and looked back, the figure was gone, but muddy footprints led all the way up to him. And what makes this extra spicy is his description matches early reconstructions of the general figure in the terracotta ranks. One of the highest-ranking, most elaborately sculpted warriors, believed to have been based on a real commander. So what are we dealing with? Ghosts or psychological side effects of high stress and night shifts or something older? Or maybe the Watchers aren't guarding the tomb. Maybe they're guarding us from what's inside. Because as one anonymous source once posted, and now deleted, we're not here to protect the Emperor. We're here to make sure no one wakes him up. Alright folks, buckle up. This next one has all the makings of a historical thriller. Rogue archaeologists, government secrets, and a civil engineer who may or may not have vanished into thin air. Let me introduce you to Lin Zhao. Not his real name, obviously, because nobody wants their grandkids cursed by a 2,000-year-old emperor. But back in the 1980s, Lin was part of a low-key government team assigned to survey the land around Mount Lee, where Jin Shu Huang's tomb slumbers like a radioactive sleeping beauty. Officially, his job was to test for seismic stability. Unofficially, he might have uncovered something that scared the state into silence. According to his anonymous interview with an overseas academic journal that quickly disappeared from the internet, naturally, Lin's team was constructed to run electromagnetic scans deeper than anything had done before. These weren't just looking for tomb walls, they were measuring heat signatures. Lin claimed that beneath the central mound, beneath the clay soldiers, the corridors, the mercury-soaked dirt, was a chamber emitting a faint but measurable source of energy. Not geothermal, he reportedly said. Something else. Something artificial. Now, when that interview surfaced on a tiny, now-defunct message board in the early 2000s, nobody cared, until people started noticing something creepy. Other names associated with Lin's team started vanishing from conference attendance lists. A couple were reassigned, and one died in a suspicious car crash that looked like a scene from a soap opera. No skid marks, no braking, just a fiery plunge off a very dry, very flat highway. And it gets weirder. Lin allegedly described discovering metallic resonance underground, frequencies that seemed to pulse when exposed to seismic tests. not just echoing back, responding like something was humming down there, like the tomb was alive. He also hinted that the central tomb chamber wasn't one chamber, it was two, nestled like a... Matryoshka doll. I can't even say that word. An inner sanctum encased in a shell, and in that inner sanctum a structure. Not a sarcophagus, something shaped like a cube. Perfectly symmetrical and magnetically sealed, and sounded suspiciously like a device instead of a coffin. Government response was deny, delay, deflect. After a few polite announcements about protecting national heritage, the project was shut down. Lynn's papers were seized and the entire team was disbanded. And Lynn, he moved to a coastal city, changed his name, and never spoke about it again. Until one blurry photo showed up years later. A man, older and bearded, standing on a cliff overlooking the sea, captioned, "The engineer who heard the tomb breathing." And how is this real? Who knows? Maybe Lynn was just an overworked civil engineer with a flair for fiction. Maybe he just watched too much X-Files. But the details, the way his story lines up with ancient texts describing celestial energy and sacred fire, buried with the Emperor. It's enough to make you wonder, what if the tomb isn't just a monument to power, and what if it's a vault? A vault built to contain something dangerous and something still running. And what happens if we open it? The thing wearing her face. My aunt's house always had a strange air about it. For as long as anyone can remember, weird things seem to follow her. The eerie stuff mostly circles around her, but pretty much everyone in the family. Even visitors. They've had their own share of strange encounters inside that house. I never stayed there overnight. I usually went during weddings or birthday gatherings or other big occasions. The place was always packed, filled with chatter and clattering plates and running children. In all that noise, it's easy to forget the house ever had a presence. But the stories people tell, those never leave my head. This particular one happened around 8 or 9 years ago. My aunt's bed used to be placed right up against the wall, and she always had preferred the wall side. My uncle slept on the open side. If she ever needed to get up in the middle of the night, she'd have to crawl over him to get down, and not exactly gracefully, since both of them were tall and broad-shouldered. One night my uncle half woke to the familiar creaking of the mattress. He could feel someone carefully slipping over him and stepping down. Still half asleep, he assumed it was my aunt going to the bathroom. The room was pitch dark, so he didn't bother opening his eyes fully. But then something clicked in his sleepy brain. My aunt wasn't even home, and she'd gone to visit my mom for a few days. He was completely alone in that bed. A cold shock went through him. He jerked upright and switched on the bedside lamp, and that's when he saw it. In the middle of the room stood a figure, taller than my aunt, with shoulders hunched forward. Its entire body covered in thick, coarse hair like an animal. It turned its head slowly toward him, and underneath all that fur it wore my aunt's exact face. It smiled, her smile. Then it bolted to the door. My uncle, terrified but running on instinct, jumped up and chased it down the hallway. But when he reached the living room, there was no one. The front door was still locked and the house was silent again. 2 months later, an old maid who used to work for my aunt dropped by to visit. Over tea, the story came up. As soon as my uncle described what he saw, the woman's hands began to tremble. She stared at my aunt and whispered, "I've seen it too." She explained how years earlier she was washing dishes near the well in their outdoor washing area, late at night. Everyone else had gone to bed and the air was cold and still, and she felt someone behind her. And when she turned, a figure with fur from shoulder to ankle was standing near the well. had my aunt's face on it. The creature tilted its head as if it was curious. The maid screamed, dropped the plate she was holding, and ran. She quit her job the next day. Never told anyone why. She thought no one would believe her anyway. To this day, whenever that story crosses my mind, I can picture that fur-covered figure wearing my aunt's face. Still sends shivers down my spine. And this time it's my cousin who goes through it. It happens almost a decade after the first incident. And by then, my uncle had already passed away from an illness, leaving my aunt, her son, and her late husband's brother with his family, wife and 2 kids in the house. That night, my uncle's brother had to leave for a late shift at the factory. Before going, your cousin, M, 23 years old back then, to check and lock every door carefully. At around 11:15, my cousin came downstairs and the house was quiet with the lights dim. He walked toward the main gate, key jingling in his hand. And just as he bent down to lock the gate, something latched onto the top of the railing from outside. 2 long, pale, almost translucent hands with skin stretched too thin and veins showing. He froze because the thing was standing in the shadows and it was tall and human-shaped. But the only part clearly visible were those arms. Fingers slightly curled, resting inches from his hands. A wave of cold hit him and he dropped the keys. And inside the house, my aunt's sister-in-law was trying to put her youngest to sleep. That's when she heard a scream. Sharp and panicked, she thought one of the kids was fooling around, so she rushed out calling their names. You know that space that's usually underneath the sofa? Well, maybe just room for slippers. Now, imagine a grown young man twisted and crammed into there with his chest heaving. To this day, nobody knows how he ended up like that. He might have thrown himself under maybe sheer terror or something. Maybe something else might have forced him down. He burned with fever for the next 3 days, and in his delirium he kept whispering about hands at the gate. Tried to run outside more than once. They had to physically restrain him so he wouldn't get hurt. When the fever finally broke, he remembered almost nothing. Only the cold and the sound of the metal gate rattling. And that was the final straw for my aunt. Within weeks, she called in specialists from the temple. In our culture, there's something called a binding, an invisible barrier traced along the edges of the property to keep anything non-human from crossing it. They perform the ritual at night, circling the house with chanting and incense. Since then, there have been no more incidents, no hands, no screams in the dark, nothing. But every time my cousin walked past that gate, even now, he never looks directly at it. I'd look directly at it. How about you? Sweet dreams.
Greetings, enthusiasts of the extraordinary. Join us at Paranormal M to explore stories that challenge conventional wisdom. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated on our latest thought-provoking narratives. I'm finally ready to talk about her. This took place over a few years in a farmhouse in the desert of Arizona. It was newly developed land. We moved into the place when I was 15. At the time, I was going through a lot emotionally and smoking a lot of weed. That might explain some of my personal experiences, so I'll try not to dwell on them too much. The house was set up almost plantation style. It was very wide and narrow. A big wraparound porch and lots of awkward corners. The front room was a tall library with an open balcony to the upstairs, which ran into long, skinny bedrooms. My parents' room was closest to the stairs and attached to a nursery with a sliding and suite door. My brothers, 2 years younger, and my room were at the end of the dark hallway. That side of the house never got sun, so it was bad vibes all around. Downstairs, there was a fucked up Harry Potter-style closet, a sunken living room, a kitchen in the center of the house, and a sunken playroom for the baby. It honestly started the first day we moved in. My brother and I were the only ones in the house, unboxing plates. The place was so empty, everything echoed. I swear it sounded like a little girl laughed, like a creepy track you could get off an app or something. Keep in mind, the TVs were not plugged in. We were on an acre of land far away from the dirt road, and my brother was way too stupid to pull a prank like that. I started hearing voices at night. This wasn't unusual. I honestly used to freak myself out badly. I think I made up noises to scare myself. My parents had raised me not to talk about things scaring me, to tough it out and to be a big girl. It was fine most of the time during the day. Everything came at night. I remember distinctly when it started messing with me in bed. In solidarity, my brother and I kept our bedroom doors open for the hallway's nightlight, and in case we needed to call for each other. We had a pretty fucked up childhood that might have contributed to all the codependency that I'll describe during this. I was falling asleep, but not quite out. I felt the blanket slipping off the bed and reached down to grab it. This was common. I didn't have a bed frame with a foot. It kept slipping no matter how I tried to tuck it. In classic horror movie fashion, the last time I pulled it, I felt tension. There was nothing that it could have been caught on. I feel like the second I went from confused to terrified, it bounced back to me. I don't know how to explain this well, but I was sure someone was under the bed pulling it from me. Later, I moved another nightlight into the bedroom. It was kind of a spooky amber orange, and I convinced my parents to let me paint the walls cherry red. Again, I was almost asleep, but not quite asleep, so I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis. I heard the carpet rustle, and maybe joints cracking. It sounded like my mom had come to check on me. I opened my eyes and I immediately froze. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. There was a woman crawling across my floor from the far side of my room to the foot of my bed. She was pale with stringy hair, like she was going bald. I couldn't see her face. I don't know how I fell asleep. I couldn't scream or move. I think she disappeared under my bed. Again, this could be a hallucination. My baby brother was about 7 months old when she started coming out during the day. My mom was a teacher at the time and was able to stay home with us during summer vacation. It was lunchtime. We were watching a movie quietly downstairs while the baby napped. There were noises upstairs, like something dropped to the ground. We listened for a second before my mom ran up. She thought the baby had fallen out of his crib. We opened the door and found him asleep. There was some weird shit on the floor. It took us a while to figure out it was drywall or something. There was a crawl space to a small attic where the AC and insulation could be reached. It was barely big enough to get into, and a good 9 feet from the ground. It also had to be pushed up and slid over to open. There was a visible gap. The carpet was a really ugly dark blue, so we could see white fucking spots on the ground like something was dragged from one side of the room to where the crib was. It stopped right in front of it. My mom checked the closet and called my stepdad. He couldn't leave work, so we stayed downstairs until he got home and checked the crawl space. We've never had animals. It's really difficult for most things to live in Arizona. so wildlife is pretty rare in that area. He didn't find anything or signs of anything living up there. This happened every other day for 2 weeks. We really didn't know what to make of it. My mom thought it might be the AC sort of suctioning the opening up. It stopped and didn't happen again for 2.5 years. When my baby sister was born and stayed in the same crib, again it happened on and off for a few weeks, and then never again. The AC never popped that opening. To keep my own solo experiences brief, I had a period of 3 months where I straight up didn't sleep. I went crazy. Every night I felt like my bed was shaking. The instant I laid my head, it would vibrate. The metal frame would sway. I'd feel like someone was pushing the mattress between the baseboards or sitting on the corner. I had my brother touch the frame one night to tell me if the shaking was in my head or not. He said it wasn't, but I'm not sure if he was just playing into it. I thought I might be having seizures or something. At one point, I got so frustrated I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the dog. I started hearing whispers, too. Not a noise that sounded odd, but someone calling my name. My name has 3 fucking syllables. I would be in my room, door open, doing something at night after my parents went to bed. It was a female voice, but it sounded off. I don't know how to explain it. The downstairs really scared me after the lights went out, so I never went down, but I did walk to the balcony to look down. I never saw anything, but the whispering would stop when I got close. My brother started hearing it too. He's kinda weird. His life's dream has been enlisting in the army, so his reaction was always getting his knife and walking right downstairs to confront it. He'd turn on the lights and look around before coming back up. He slept on my floor for a few nights because he was convinced that she wanted me. We had prior haunting experiences which led to my parents making jokes that the ghosts follow us. They didn't pay much attention to it at this time when it was quiet. One night my parents went out with the babies. My brother and I were in our rooms, doors open as usual. We started hearing something weird. I thought it was the wind. It got louder until it was clear that it was a woman fucking wailing. I know it sounds crazy, but it was so clear. We hid in my room for what felt like hours calling my mom. For some reason, it didn't occur to us to call the police. The crying stopped. We hatched a plan to run for the stairs and out the nearest door. All of the lights were on in the house, and my brother had his stupid knives. It's like it knew we were going to leave. We heard shuffling outside the door and maybe breathing. It could have been the air conditioning. We kind of decided that we were ready to die, unlocked the door and booked it. The crying started again, and it was clear it was in my parents' room. We stood outside the property line for an hour waiting for them to come home, watching the house. No one could have gotten out without us seeing. We had huge windows lining the upstairs hallway that showed everything with the lights on. My parents made fun of us and still do about that night. A few other incidents include my baby brother talking to the man, quote-unquote, upstairs. He'd stand in front of the balcony and talk up to someone. He told us the man was hiding in my room. He talked about the man in the window and would ask, "Who's that?" directed at the doors at night. I don't want to talk about all of it, but there were so many instances of voices and doors slamming and things being knocked over in my room that I thought I was losing my mind. I moved out at 18 and came back occasionally, usually to babysit. Apparently, my reluctant believer mother and absolute skeptic stepdad watched a coffee pot jump off the counter. They also were sitting outside having a fire on an open evening when they saw a figure in the balcony window of their bedroom. It was a tall man, but my stepdad still needed the urge to go upstairs. It appeared a second time, closer to where the nursery door was. My mom said that she had horrible dreams about a man in the corner of her room after that. She was present for many of the times that we heard footsteps upstairs, doors slamming when the AC was off, but she always denied there being anything wrong. My parents left town with the kids for a week. At this point, I was 19 and living happily an hour away. My mom begged me to check on my brother and stay a few nights for the weekend. I arrived during the evening after I got off of work. I asked how it had been alone, and he said it was fine. He just didn't go upstairs at night and minded his own business, as he says. He said if he ignored it and tried not to get scared, then it ignored him. He felt safe with the dog. We were watching YouTube and eating when we started to hear a deep noise. At first, I thought it was a biker, one of the small buggies people drove out there. Then I noticed it was holding a tune. It was humming. The dog had a weird thing about staring into the bathroom if the door was open, which was scary at night. This time, the door was closed, and he still stood up and stared. The noise was so deep it sounded like it couldn't be human, but it was definitely melodic. There's nothing I could figure out to explain it. My brother and I just kind of looked at each other. Then a door slammed upstairs and we decided to fuck off and go on a walk. When we got back, I decided I would sleep in my parents' room. It didn't feel right to stay in the kids' room, but looking back, it would have been best to stay close to my brother. I fell asleep surprisingly easy. I guess about 2 hours passed before my brother slammed the door open. The house smelled like it was burning. Not really like a fire smell, but like a burning plastic and trash smell. I was panicked. I was the adult and I didn't know what to do. We checked the house. I turned off the air conditioning thinking it might be on fire, and we opened all the windows and fell asleep on the couches downstairs. The next day, the smell was still lingering, but less overwhelming. The air conditioner was fine when I turned it back on. Like usual, the day was fine. That next night, my brother and I went on a Jack-in-the-Box run. It might have taken 30 minutes. We arrived home to a mess of blood, vomit, and shit. The dog was sick all over the living room. We immediately took him to an emergency vet, certain he was dying. They checked him for everything that they could and gave him a clean bill. When we got home, all hell broke loose. My brother and I were cleaning up a mess with the doors open for airflow. There was absolutely insane banging noises from upstairs. We hadn't locked up on the way out. My brother thought someone had snuck in and was trashing the upstairs. He went up to check, and I hung downstairs ready to call the police. Nothing happened. Nothing even seemed out of place. We kept cleaning, but the noise started almost immediately. It kind of sounded like someone was shouting behind a wall of cement. I couldn't tell the gender. My brother told me that he had been fine until I got there, that I could leave if I wanted. I totally did, and I didn't go back. My parents sold the house this year. During the interim of the move, they stayed in an Airbnb. My brother lived really close to his work, so we stayed in the house with the dog for a few weeks. This story is just his own, so I'm still not sure if I believe it. He's kind of weird, but not one to embellish. He had been hearing the usual things, even his name being called in the night, but ignored it all. His friends had been coming over to keep him company. The last day he was supposed to finish moving, he brought a friend. He says he felt that they were being watched the whole time they cleared the place out, and his friend left him to lock up. They got into the car facing the house, when they noticed the blinds were open. They were definitely closed on the way out. His friend claims that he saw them open from the side of his eye. My brother says there was a woman squatting in front of the downstairs window close to where he had just left from. She was pale, her nose was hooked, and her hair was black and stringy. Again, classic horror movie ghost. He said she had black eyes with visible white dots in the middle, inside out eyes, as he called them, and she was smiling. He says it took him a second of shock to realize she was looking right at him. He felt sick, like she could walk right out and get him. The burned rubber when his friend snapped out of it and they screamed at each other all the way down the road about what they saw. He called me right after to explain it, but I was with friends and not really willing to listen. What fucks me up is that my mom thought he had a psychotic break. He went into his room and cried all night at the Airbnb. She thought something happened with his girlfriend. My brother is not a crier. I haven't seen him do it since we were little. When we got together and talked about it, his eyes teared up then too. He said he didn't know why, he just knew she wanted to kill him. He drew a picture of her. Let me know if you're interested in seeing it. It's not great, but it still fills me with the deepest foreboding. It took me a while to realize that I saw her too, just once in my bedroom almost 5 years ago. Seeing her suddenly made sense. I knew it didn't feel like a woman, but it felt feminine. It felt like something pretending to be a woman. Anyways, I know this is long. Feel free to offer your own opinion. My ex brought this up today. We dated all through high school and had a few experiences together that she recounts as her only paranormal encounter. I would love to still think this was my own delusion, but it was shared by too many people to be. Maybe a few things are explainable, but most of it isn't. It's affected me so deeply I'm still terrified that if I think too much about her, she'll follow us a state away. I also forgot to mention that we heard word from neighbors that the previous family had 12 people, Mormons, living in a house that we could only fit 6 into. They were really weird, according to multiple families, and they moved in with 5 kids and left with 4. We heard a toddler drowned in the upstairs bathtub. No idea which one, or if this is true. We couldn't find any documentation. My life as a sensitive person. To start off with, I've always been a sensitive person, to the point that I'm highly susceptible to migraines, sun sickness, and car sickness. Not only are my regular senses heightened, but I could be sort of having a sixth sense. I always say that this is a family thing, but I can't actually remember who told me that, when, or why. That said, I've always been able to kind of feel people's energy in the form of emotions, and had a bit of an awareness of electromagnetic energy. I was able to tell when a CRTV was on anywhere in the house. But most relevant to this subreddit, I've always been sensitive to the supernatural. I also usually don't dream, though dreaming has become more common in adulthood, but I attribute that to a less consistent sleep, as I most often dream only if I fall back asleep after waking up. As a kid, I remember I was afraid of the dark because I always felt like I saw things in it. But that was very likely my imagination, as I remember that I didn't have a strong ability to differentiate my imagination from reality until I was about 8. I remember around 12 I had an out-of-body experience, but that wasn't really ghostly. Around 14 or 15, I had a very active autumn. On Halloween, I saw 3 shadow people in one night. One watching me from a fence, one behind an above-ground pool while playing hide-and-seek. I can't remember the third, but I remember there was 3. This all happened at my father's best friend's house during a Halloween party, and I remember people saying I must have saw someone in a costume. But the more you think about it, the dumber that sounds, because shadow people really just don't look like people in costume. A week or 2 later in November, I was out late at an appointment with my mother, and we were walking back to the car. The building had lights on the sides, and I was trailing a few feet behind my mother. It was a short walk, but at one point I just looked down at my shadow and noticed a second one next to mine. Almost twice as long and maybe a foot wider. I looked over my left shoulder to see where it was coming from, but as I did, I heard a rustling in the bushes about 5 feet to my right. Turning around, I didn't see anything there or in the bushes, and the shadow was gone. I freaked out and ran with my mom to the car. I can't remember clearly if I definitively saw shadow people any times in the future after that, but I think I did. The next major things I experienced, though, were with my Uncle Frank. He was a very well-respected man, and not just my godfather, but felt like the godfather with the way that he treated everybody and the way that he carried himself. He had a position high up in American Airlines, and when he passed away in 2012, I remember being told that the plane carrying his body back to New York made 2 trips around the city before landing. I think he landed at JFK. I don't know for sure. During this time, though, I was 17 and attending Stony Brook University, so I had to get picked up and brought home for the funeral. I only had 1 pair of dress pants that I brought with me, and before we threw it in the wash, we emptied the pockets. But when I took the pants out of the dryer and stuck my hands in my pockets to open them up, I found a freshly minted $20 bill. I still have it pressed into a book in my pocket. Every time I saw Frank, he'd give me money, just like that. So finding that 20, I just started crying. Frank is an active spirit, and I know he's done a few other things, but only one other stands out in my memory. This spring, my cousin Gina got engaged to her longtime boyfriend Rory. Rory knew about Frank, of course, but I don't think they ever met, and he said that after Gina said yes, they had commented, "I wish I could have asked your grandfather Frank for permission." They swore that immediately after they said that, a rainbow appeared out of nowhere. When I spoke to my mom about how I can't remember more Frank stories, she assured me that people like him are always around, and she said she still feels her father around all the time. I asked her about this because she's never mentioned this to me before, and she was surprised she hadn't. So I'll share what she said now. Whenever I'm looking for something in the garage, I usually have trouble. So if I can't find something after a moment, I just say, "Okay, Dad, where is it?" And suddenly it would appear. I found this to be a very interesting story for a few reasons. 1, my grandfather died long before we got their current house, so kind of funny he'd know where anything in that garage is. 2, my mom has always had a talent for finding things no one else can, and I've joked about her being able to find anything for years. I wonder if that's just because of her dad. This last thing I have to mention is not really fun at all, and I still don't know how to explain it. So me and my fiance moved into our apartment last June, and we went to her family's Thanksgiving together for the first time ever that year. So on the way there, we went through a neighborhood that I've never seen before. And the second we entered the neighborhood, something very, very wrong. I'm starting to cry and sweat cold, just remembering this, but I can't explain it very well. I was just sitting there, and all of a sudden I got a chill. Something was focusing on me, a very strong presence. I couldn't say where or what, but something was in that neighborhood. took us about 7 minutes to get from one side to the other, and my fiancée was terrified. Not because she felt anything, but because I was crying, a horrified mess complaining to her about something watching me. Something felt like it was out to get me, and I'd never been so scared in my life. We went to my parents after we left her family's house, so we've never gone back to that neighborhood. And I wasn't paying attention to where it was going, so I'm not sure where it was. But I don't want to ever go back there again. It's a really hard thing to explain, that sudden sensation of not being watched but almost hunted. I'd never felt anything like it before, and I never want to feel it again. I never saw anything. It was about 3 o'clock, so not even dark out. And it seemed like a normal neighborhood, but I swear on my life that something was there, and it felt like it was out to get me for the entire time we were there. Westminster Chime. So I live in the tropics of Australia. My house is situated in a remote part of the Daintree rainforest. I live on a house that sits on stilts, a Queenslander. And from my bedroom window, it's about 3 to 4 meter drop. My closest neighbor is about 1 kilometer away, 0.62 miles. I don't live on a main road. However, I'm close to a creek. There's literally no one near me. This only happened around 2 nights ago. I was alone in my house, except for my cockatiel. I was sitting in bed watching some TV. Nothing out of the usual. I then got that all too familiar feeling of someone watching me, or something about to happen, a feeling that I've gotten accustomed to over the past 20 years. At that point, I heard the tap running in the kitchen, which I thought was strange, so I got up and went to the kitchen, with my phone torch as my only guidance. Didn't want to wake my bird up by turning the lights on. I've gotten used to these types of things happening, and I'm not really all that scared of them anymore. However, as I turned off the tap, my wall clock did its Westminster chime. I looked over and the time showed 12:38 a.m. This straight away caught my attention, as I only set the clock to chime every hour. Then, as I was near the clock, the tap turned back on full force. I jolted quickly, looking in its direction. I went to turn it off, and there was condensation all over the handle and all over the window that sits above the tap. The tap was freezing cold, even though the water coming out was boiling hot. My bird at this point was now awake due to my clock, as it had just chimed a second time, roughly 12:44. I quickly got my bird and brought him back into my bedroom with me. I left the kitchen and the clock, as I just couldn't be bothered to put up with what was going on. My poor bird was scared shitless. I admit I kinda was too. As I sat in my bed, there were 3 knocks on my bedroom door. When I ignored them, they moved to my window. I got up and opened my curtains to nothing but trees and black as ink sky. I opened up the window, and my God, I'm getting goosebumps writing this. I heard whispers at the bottom of the ground far below me. I couldn't understand what they were saying. Then they stopped. As soon as they stopped, 3 knocks yet again hit my door. I slammed my window shut and locked the door. I yelled out, "Can you please just leave me in peace?" They stopped. Nothing else happened that night, and I finally got some sleep. It was really creepy. Not too scary, but scary enough to give me some trouble sleeping. House on Schloss Street. It was one of the last weeks of my Christmas holiday in Australia. My family was getting ready to move out of our Queenslander. For those who don't know what a Queenslander is, the experience happened within a week. The last 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, I had 2 mates over for a sleepover. The first day of this experience, previous Friday, my grandfather was looking after me. The house has a general layout. There's a long hallway, 4 bedrooms, and 2 bathrooms that branch off from said hallway. At the bottom of the hallway, there's the kitchen, lounge room, and dining area. There's a second small hallway leading from the kitchen out to the back deck. This deck sits far higher up in the backyard, like a giant balcony looking over at the backyard. It's worth mentioning that a spare bedroom branches off from the top of the main hallway. This is where the ladder of the story is. I should also mention that I had a fascination for electrics, still do, so I had electric train sets, and I also had a security system, only 3 security cameras, because I liked playing around with the switchboard. Friday. My mom and dad had left early for work, so I woke up to the smell of crispy bacon and egg breakfast sandwiches. My grandfather always believes that the breakfast is the most important meal and never settles for anything that doesn't have sausages, eggs, or some sort of breakfast sandwich. I slowly stumbled into the kitchen, still half asleep, gazing up at my steaming hot meal on the table. "Well, are you going to sit down and eat?" "It isn't going to eat itself." Per my grandfather's query, I sat down and ate. So did he. We had a bit of a discussion. He said that we would go to the corner shop in the afternoon, but he wanted to watch the midday races, which was code word for he wanted to sleep for 3 hours after lunch. After breakfast, I played with some Lego and played with my dog. Nothing really happens until after lunch, and my grandfather's asleep. So let's skip to then. With my grandfather snoring loudly and reclined in his chair, and me, bored with the races, decide to go down into the backyard and say hello to the cockatoos. My neighbors at the time had a pair of sulfur-crested cockatoos. Their cage was outside, down in the middle of the neighborhood boundary, but we didn't mind. I walked down to the cage that sat under 2 huge avocado trees. "Hello, Bluey. Hello, Bluey." The pair knew my name, as I visited them often. They were honestly quite cute. I sat on my little wooden stool I had there, and just admired them for 5 or 10 minutes, as well as listening to the magpies flying high above. Then I got that feeling of someone watching, that feeling that something is going to happen. Out of instincts, I looked behind me, and up towards the deck, just barely able to see the back door due to the perspective. After seeing nothing there, I turned back around to the cockatoos. This is when things become hectic. Only 10 seconds after I turned back around, the crests upon both cockatoos rose simultaneously to their full length. They flattened their body feathers and stood up straight. Cockatoos and cockatiels do this behavior when they're mostly curious, shocked, surprised, or worried. They started to absolutely scream. They started to shout my name, their owner's name, and also started to sort of native scream. I was now in shock. I didn't want to turn around. I was frozen until I felt an icy cold breath on the back of my neck. I instantly turned around from feeling this. I see nothing. While looking behind me, the front legs of my stool just snapped. I fell forward, face planting into the ground. At this point, the cockatoos have started to fly around in their cage. I stand up quickly, frozen again. Then, in the side of my ear, I hear, "Bluey." It was quiet and sounded like an old, angry man. I felt his breath touch the outside of my ear. I started to sprint. I got no more than a meter when I slipped and fell down into the ground from a fallen rotten avocado. I tried to get up, but of course I had badly rolled my ankle. As I tried to stand up, I heard a scream, and I mean a full-on scream, burst into my left ear. "Bluey, run!" Yet again, it sounded like the same old creepy man. I was stumbling, almost hopping towards the stairs to get up onto the deck. I was probably going a little faster than walking speed. After reaching the top of the deck, I made the last hobble towards the back door. It was locked. I started to absolutely scream for my grandfather. I was banging on the door, just yelling as loud as I humanly could. I saw my granddad through the large glass pane rushing towards the door. He pushed it open, but it slammed back into his face, causing the glass pane to shatter into huge shards. Then it stopped and let the door open. Nothing really happened after that. However, my granddad thought it would be best if we spent the rest of the day at his house. Tuesday to Wednesday. I was still in shock from Friday, but today was the day that two of my good friends came for a sleepover as I was moving cities. Lucas and James arrived around 1 o'clock. We did the usual things, played in the backyard, hung out with the small wooden treehouse my dad built us, or that my dad had built us. It sat about halfway up on one of the many avocado trees that we had in the backyard. I did get that creepy feeling that I got on Friday. I wasn't totally comfortable playing around in the yard, but I had my friends there, so I thought it was okay. It was around 6 o'clock when my dad told us to come inside for dinner, and to bring Fletcher inside. Fletcher's my dog. We always bring him inside for the night. We went and fetched Fletcher. He was sniffing around some dirt holes, as lots of schnauzers do. We came into the kitchen and sat down for nachos. We decided to watch a couple of movies, play some Wii, and then go to sleep in the spare bedroom. It was probably 11 o'clock. My parents were in bed and fast asleep. The three of us had just finished watching our third movie and decided that we should probably head off to bed too. We shambled up the long, narrow hallway with Fletcher guiding us. We finally reached the spare bedroom. Inside sat a TV, my switchboard for the cameras, a queen, and a single bed. The three of us sat on the queen bed as James wanted to have a look outside, so I turned on the TV and the camera system set up. I switched to channel 1, the front camera. They had night vision, but as you can imagine, this was around 10 years ago or so it wasn't the best night vision. But it wasn't very clear. I continued to switch to the second camera, channel 2, and pointed down towards the driveway, then to the third, channel 3, which looked down into the backyard. James thought it was awesome. Lucas just wanted to sleep, and at this point I was so tired that I really couldn't care. James took control and switched through the channels, thinking he was some sort of security guard. Then some static took hold of channel 2. Bluey. What was that, Bluey? It's just a bit of static. It happens sometimes, James. Fletcher at this point was next to Lucas, the both of them pretty much asleep on the queen bed. I was in the single, making sure James didn't stuff up the setup or my desk. It was at this point where I got that feeling again. I desperately wanted to turn on the bedroom light, but I didn't want to seem like a wuss. So instead, I leaned in closer, now watching each camera very carefully along with James. Fletcher, what are you doing? I'm trying to sleep. I turned around to see Lucas disgruntled, and Fletcher no longer sleeping, but instead standing up on the bed. His ears were pricked up. He was slightly leaning forward, putting pressure on his front legs. Again, this is common defense or attack stance for a schnauzer. He started to growl. I was now fully alarmed. So was Lucas and James. Static had not taken over the camera system, or rather had now taken over the camera system. Lucas put a chair up against the doorknob. James got up and shut the blinds. James scrambled up from the office chair. Lucas grabbed one of the two chairs at my desk and quickly put it up against the door. I sat down and rebooted the system. Quite a panic, if I may add. After rebooting, there was no longer any static. I quickly put it into channel 3 to look at the backyard. Sure enough, I could barely see the cockatoos flying and going wild in their cages. I mustered, oh no. Me saying this absolutely freaked the hell out of James and Lucas. They turned to a puddle of mush. Well, what's wrong, Bluey? Well, I'm pretty sure we're going to find out soon enough. Static no longer filled the camera system. No, instead the lenses started to fog up. I could no longer see out of channel 3. Quick, go to channel 1. There's no point, James. They all have condensation on them. At this point, Lucas was quiet until he said, "Guys, someone just poked me." Lucas was on the queen bed. James was on the single. I was sitting in the office chair. James and I went into the queen with Lucas. The three of us sat huddled. We grabbed Fletcher, still growling, towards the door. The three of us watched the camera. We could see faint shadows moving around. I went to turn on the bedroom light. You guessed it, it wouldn't turn on. Then the camera went to static. I changed the channels. Nothing. All were static. I rebooted it. Twice. Nothing. Then a cackle was heard. I jumped back into the bed. The cackle went again. At this point, James was on the brink of tears. I felt another breath on the back of my neck. It sent a spine-tingling shiver throughout my body. Lucas peeked through the blinds. The window had condensation all over it, but that wasn't the problem. Lucas mumbled, "Oh my God." Written on the outside of the window was END. That window has nothing beneath it except the ground, which was 3/4 meters below. 3 or 4 meters below. Lucas quickly crawled back from the window, back to the middle of the room. Fletcher stopped growling, but now instead was whimpering. Just as he started to whimper, we heard a single tap at the window, then nothing. Fletcher quickly looked towards the door, and sure enough, we heard footsteps slowly coming closer from the hallway. Then the footsteps stopped, right in front of the door. Silence for 10 seconds. Fletcher began to absolutely cry, and for good reason. 3 loud knocks were hit in a large amount of force on the door, then again silence. Until rapid tapping on the window took place, a rock then got thrown at the window, smashing it. We started to absolutely scream, moving the chair trying to pull open the door. Then the same voice screamed in the room. "You're wanting to leave so early? I'm that bad of a host?" The door flung open. An inertia effect happened and we fell flat onto the ground. We got up and ran screaming down the hallway. We bolted past a mirror that shattered as we went past it. My parents were now awake, and as soon as they stepped outside of their room, it all stopped. James and Lucas went home early, and thankfully we moved out of that house 3 days later. However, the next morning we saw the true aftermath. All 3 cameras had been ripped out. Only thing left were wires coming from the roof. We never found the cameras. The window had somehow been smashed, and the 2-meter-long mirror was in ruins. I never really found out who the spirit was, but he was definitely aggressive. The house wasn't too old. I think it was built in the 1940s from what I can remember. Both experiences were terrifying, and I've never owned security cameras again due to the fear of what I may see on them. Yungabura Fog. This story happened many years ago, around the months of July and June. My family and I often vacationed up in a cabin in Yungabura Cairns, Australia, and this was during winter. We do this as we missed the cold days we would get from our hometown in Toowoomba during winter, as Cairns is tropical. So it's summer 24/7. Yungabura is a very, very small town that resides on top of a hill. It's one of those towns that if you blink, you miss it. However, it's quaint and friendly. It's historical with about 150 plus years of heritage. It's usually with rich heritage in small towns that local folk legends form over the years. One of these legends came true. We rented this cabin that was on brink of the bushlands and was next door to an old farmhouse that has quite a bit of land, including some of the bushland in the cabin backed up into. To get to the cabin, you had to walk up a somewhat steep dirt road that also leads to the aforementioned farmhouse. The dirt road also had a medium-sized pond that ran along it. This dirt road came off of one of the main streets of Yungabura. Anyway, on our last night staying there, I went to the pub to see one of my good friends who lives in Yungabura. I had to drive early the next morning, so I didn't have a drop of alcohol. He, on the other hand, did not have to drive anywhere the next morning, so he pretty much drained the pub. It got to about 11:30 p.m. and I decided I better get back to the cabin to go to sleep. The cabin was only a 15-minute walk away, so after saying my goodbyes, I started to walk back. As I was walking, I realized not driving was a dumb idea, as it was about 5 degrees Celsius or 41 Fahrenheit. I had a very thin jumper, and that was all. As I continued to walk on, it grew colder. I started to shiver big time. I finally reached the entrance to my driveway. God, did it look ominous. There were no street lights leading along the dirt road, so it was pitch black. I decided to get out my phone and turn the flashlight on. It was at this point that I knew something was up. After I had my flashlight on, the fog started to roll in. At first, it was only light fog, but it continued and developed into heavy fog. Then it surpassed heavy fog. Thereupon, I could barely see my shoes below me. All I could see was white in front of me. I said to myself, here we fucking go, something's about to happen. Get it over and done with. On recollection, I believe I actually said that out loud. My flashlight was now rendered superfluous. I decided to stop walking as I knew there was a steep ditch with a pond at the bottom. The last thing I wanted was to fall in it. As I stood there, only getting colder and even more terrified, I saw a lantern in the distance. A small amber light coming down the driveway. Then I heard, "Son, is that you? Come out here out of the fog. Follow the lamp." It was my mom. I couldn't see her yet, so instead I followed her light. I continued to follow it for about 3 minutes, safely walking up the dirt driveway. I saw the light climb up steps and I heard a door open, so I knew I was near the cabin. Then the light went out. I continued to walk in the direction I saw it last. I was calling out to my mom to turn it back on, and there was no reply. Until I finally ran into a wooden guardrail and some steps. I walked up the steps, and instantly my knees felt weak. They had turned to jelly. I was on the doorstep of the old abandoned farmhouse. The door was there, swinging open in the gentle wind, making a sinister creaking noise along with it. There's 3 things you do in this type of situation. The 3 F's. Flight, fight, or freeze. I was frozen to the core. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't turn around and find my way back. I was definitely not stepping foot inside that house. I was stuck. I then heard a voice coming from inside the house. "My son, welcome home. Nasty weather, hmm?" The voice no longer sounded like my mom's. It had a prominent British accent. It was then I realized I would rather be out in the fog than standing in the doorstep of this house. I quickly walked down the stairs. I heard the voice now yelling, "My son, where are you going?" I started to sprint, but I was running and I smashed my foot and leg against some stone and fell flat onto the ground. I took a chunk out of my knee and cuts all along my hands, still have the scars. I turned around and realized I had not tripped over a stone. I had tripped over a tombstone. At this point, I screamed. I got up and I started to run even more. I was screaming out for my parents and started to slow down to a jog. I stopped. thought I got far enough from the house until a little amber light, at least 6 of them, started to surround me. They started to come closer. I found a gap between them and I ran for it. Yet again, I felt like I was sprinting for my life. It was like I was in a race, but the metal at the end was my life. Before I knew it, slam! I ran straight into a wall with my head being the contact point. I blacked out. And for what I can remember, I was woken up by my dad, who heard something smack into the cabin. Apparently, when he went out to get me, he saw one little amber light flickering near the farmhouse through all the fog. That was the end of my night. And any vacation near that cabin. We decided not to leave early the next morning, to give me time to rest. This also gave me time to ring up my friend so he could come over and perhaps give me some insight into what I saw and what my dad saw. Me and him sat out on the patio. I could see the farmhouse only about 500 meters away. It looked old and desolate. This is the folk legend according to him. Apparently, back when the small town was first being founded, that farmhouse was one of the first built in the late 19th century. During the 1910s, a well-known mother, Anne, her apparent name, let her son play with some of the mates down in the main stretch of town that one day. It started to get late. As it got later, Anne grew more worried. Then heavy fog started to roll in. She decided to get her kerosene lamp and go out looking for him. As soon as she walked down, she could hear his footsteps. She told him to follow the lamp. When she made her way back to the house, she was not accompanied by her son. It was not until the next morning that they found him dead in the bottom of the pond. He hit his head hard and died instantly. The grave is apparently her son's. The mother apparently searches for her son on winter nights and lures males from the pub on late cold darkness, mistaking them for her own lost son. The Burning Man. This story happened about 4 years ago. I'm in my late 20s, and so is my friend. It was around June, in Toowoomba, Australia. My friend, let's call him Mark, asked me to come pick him up from his college, Downlands. June is when it gets its coldest in Toowoomba, and that night I remembered reaching -4 degrees Celsius or 25 Fahrenheit. It was around 6:30 when I reached the college. Mark is a teacher there, and apparently his car had stopped working. I wandered through the dark trying to find the admin block. I finally reached the block, and Mark was inside. He looked shaken up. I asked him what happened. He said in a shaky voice, "He's here, a ghost. We're at the school too late. He's been moving stuff." Now, as you can imagine at this point, I started to absolutely freak it. Downlands is a boarding school, so I knew there was a small amount of people still here. However, the boarding block and the admin block is a far, far ways apart, and I was not about to wander through the dark pathways, with Mark spouting the stuff he was. Instead, I decided to go back to the car with him. So we locked up at the office and cautiously walked out. As we were blindly walking in a concrete path in our thick jumpers, the wind was making an eerie howling noise as it started to blow gusts. Then I saw a flickering light, an orange light coming from behind us. All of a sudden it got very warm, and I mean a quick sudden boost in temperature. We were about halfway down this hill, so Mark and I turned around to see what was at the top of the hill. And this still freaks me out when I think of it. It was a man on fire. He was standing there watching us when we turned around. He stared at us for about 5 seconds, felt like 5 hours then. He then let out the most horrendous scream and started to run at us. Mark and I ran and fell over to the side of the path. The man on fire ran past us down the hill and into the forest. I got up, I looked down toward the oval. He was still running. He just came out of the forest and was running towards a road until him and the fire vanished. At that point, we decided to run to the boarding block and find another member of faculty. We reached the block. We found one of Mark's colleagues. He let us stay the night. We were told it's a common thing to see if you stay in the admin block too late, or if you're walking those paths at that time of night. Even from this block, everyone can hear his screams at least once a week as he terrorizes the school grounds at dark. Apparently, the faculty member, whom was also a teacher, said he had only seen the burning man once. When I asked Mark the next morning what he had seen in the admin block, he replied with, "All the drawers started to open, and I heard a voice say, 'The fire has been lit.' When I first started to work here, the office ladies warned me that I shouldn't stay late near the building. Now I know why." Before we left the next morning, we went to the admin block and asked the office ladies if they'd ever seen him. We went in and saw a younger lady in her 30s. She asked, "Do you have an appointment, Mark?" "No, but we just wanted to ask you if you'd ever seen..." Then the older lady, maybe late 60s, early 70s, came out of the back and said, "You two saw the burning man, didn't you?" Mark replied, "Yes, we did. We saw him last night." The old woman came closer and said, "Yes, all the drawers were open. I've seen him many times. Not a pleasant experience. Try not to stay late. If you do, don't come anywhere near this building." The younger lady spoke up. "I've seen him twice. I hated it. I've never stayed late again." We both left. Mark got the day off. I never stepped foot on those school grounds ever again. The burning man at the Downlands College has been noted as one of Toombawoombaa's most just pernicious paranormal experiences. Outback Northern Nissan Ghost. I'm in my late 20s, and last month I had one of the most scariest experiences I've ever had. My family attracts spirits. As in the 18th century, some of my family dabbled in some spiritual stuff. They got blamed as witches, and they got burned at the stake. That's a story for another day. Anyway, I was on a 4-wheel drive adventure with my dad, my mom, and my dog. We have a buffed-up Pajero. Not the best 4-wheel drive, but it still makes it across desert tracks. It was on the 12th of December, I believe. We were crossing a track in the Northern Territory, Australia. We had just finished crossing a rocky portion of the track and was now on flat dirt. We started to set up camp for the night. As I stepped out of the car, I went around to the back where the water containers were to fetch some water for my dog. But as I walked near them, I heard a trickling and gushing noise. Sure enough, a rock had punctured both external water containers. I quickly went and told Dad. We had barely enough internal water to last us a day, so we made the decision to drive at night. You should only really drive at night if you most definitely have to. Otherwise, you should generally avoid it. We knew there was a small community just outside of Uendumu, around 45 minutes away. It was already 7:15, pitch black. We got in the car and started to go for the drive. This road was particularly dangerous, as it was long and straight. People often fell asleep and drove off the road going 110 kilometers an hour. We were about halfway there. I was sitting in the back with my standard schnauzer on my lap, and he was drifting asleep until his ears pricked up. He then jumped up, looked like he was trying to look behind us. I turned around and saw nothing but a black, empty, eerie desert. I turned back to the front to see my mom drifting to sleep and my dad wide awake. Then all of a sudden, my dog started to whine really loud. A really bright light was reflecting in the side mirrors and rear view mirror. My dad said, "What? Is that a car behind us?" I looked behind us. There were two extremely bright lights tailgating our car. At this point, my dog was barking and whining. My mom had woken up and immediately started to panic. The lights continued to tailgate us for the next 2 minutes. We then passed a tree, and all of a sudden the light had stopped. The car was no longer behind us. It had disappeared. My dad stopped the car. He turned it around, thinking the car may have crashed. We got near the tree. I got up on the roof, turned on the giant spotlight that we had fitted for this trip, and shone it all around us, searching for the car. There was no sight of it, just empty red dirt. We searched for another 15 minutes, even on foot. Nothing. So we continued on with the drive, hoping to find some help in the coming community. Once we reached the small settlement just outside Uendumu, we raced into the pub. The pub was empty except for the bartender. He immediately asked us, "What's wrong? Something up?" My dad replied with, "We were just driving along the track and we saw a car disappear off the road. Somebody could be hurt." The bartender put down his rag and said, "You guys saw the Northern Nissan. No one's hurt, at least now." I replied in a somewhat impatient tone, "What do you mean somebody could be hurt?" He then pointed to the news article up on the wood wall. It read, "Nissan crashes into tree, killed all 2 on board." What you saw was the ghost of the Northern Nissan. It crashed a bit more than a decade ago. It was 2 brothers quickly making their way into town as one of the brothers were sick. They crashed into that tree at about 7:30 p.m. Many people who make that road at night see them, at around the time you guys saw them. My mom's mouth had dropped. My dad sat down. We stayed in that small settlement for the night. In the morning, we decided to go look at the tree. What we saw was a scar from the crash, and exactly where we saw the car disappear the night before. It was creepy to think about. I got out on foot searching for a ghost car. Seconds after it had disappeared, my family had seen the Northern Nissan. Drunk, so telling my tale. This was around 5 or 6 years ago. I'd say I was a skeptic, but not adverse to the idea of ghosts. I worked in a nursery, kids, not plants, and the building itself used to be a hospital for tuberculosis. The baby side of the nursery was an old morgue for the hospital, not my side. I'd never heard anything in that building, in the nursery, but numerous girls, staff, had said that they had seen a woman walking around the baby's nap room in the old morgue. But when they ran in, it was always empty. It had a video monitor so they would see her on the black and white screen. The older kids were in the old hospital. Anyways, I'd covered many times in this old morgue, and I'd worked in the old hospital side for 3 years without any incident or hearing of any incident. One night, though, when I'd moved to the office, not working with the kids anymore, I had a few things to finish up when the nursery was closing, so I spoke to the manager and got their keys so I could close. The owner lived in a house right behind the nursery, and there were houses all around. Also, again, I had worked there 3 years and was often the first person to arrive in the morning. So when I decided to close, I was not worried. It was also Scotland in the summer, so even though it was 6 at night, it was very bright outside. It was about 6:30 when I finished what I was doing, and I was in no rush. I was in a great mood because I had managed to finish something so important, so I was kind of swanning around the building. At the last one, I had to check every room to make sure that there were no kids or fire hazards. And as I was checking a room at the back with the glass, a Perpix, Just kind of walking, looking into the entrance, I saw a tall man dressed in dark clothes walk into the front door. I ran to the entrance to tell them all the kids were gone already and to check the other building, but no one was there. Very strange, but I figured I must have imagined it because I was looking from the other side of the building. So I cracked on with checking rooms. I got to the next room, and I had a panicked feeling telling me to get out, run as fast as I could and not look back. I have anxiety, but I've never experienced anything like this. It was like a serial killer was chasing you. As soon as I got outside the door, I felt a wave of calm over me. I locked the door and cycled away. I actually met one of my colleagues just driving away. That's how quick I had been. Anyway, the next morning, I told the manager. Basically said I wouldn't close again, and I wouldn't want anyone else doing it on their own. That's when the girl who had been doing it for months said that she had seen the figure, the same as I had seen, every night, either the door or the preschool, and she always felt that it meant her harm. She needed a pay increase with closing, and she was very level-headed. Just like me, we actually worked in the same room and got on for that reason. And didn't want to think about it too much, but she did what she had to do and get out of there as soon as possible. During the day, we had no problems at all, so we thought that maybe the entity was fine with day-to-day business, but once it was done, they wanted us out of there. Either way, that feeling and the clearness with it that I saw that man has made me seriously rethink ghosts. I'm not even sure if that's what it was, but honestly, that feeling was unlike anything I've ever felt before or since. Pure hatred in your heart. Great-grandmother. It was back in 2008 or 2009. My great-grandmother had passed away. Fortunately, I had the chance to see her one last time, the week before she died, and she told me that she had left us with a smile. With that, I knew that seeing me was really delightful for her. So it was early in the morning, getting ready to go to the nurse before going to school with my little sister. We're both sitting at the back of the car, still a little sleepy. While I was looking outside the window, I saw a humanoid figure forming. I immediately recognized this face. It was my late great-grandmother wearing the same flowery purple blouse I've always seen her with, both hands on her stomach, looking at me and saying something. Today I still don't know what she wanted to tell me. When it happened, I thought I was the only one who saw this. I told my mother about this the next day, and she almost told me I was kind of crazy, until my sister also told me that she had seen the apparition. I was kind of disturbed by hearing that. It was thrilling and frightful at the same time. The only person who believed us without saying we were crazy was her grandmother, actually the great-grandmother's daughter, because she was also seeing her in her dreams, in her prayers, and she kept talking to her for maybe 5 years or more. Until one night, my great-grandfather didn't visit my grandmother. More recently, this didn't happen to me but to my sister last year. She was sleeping at one of her friend's places, and she had a sleep paralysis episode. Not really a sleep paralysis, it was really strange, and during that, she was wide awake. She could walk, but not talk. Trying to wake up one of her friends, she scratched him. She also saw her great-grandmother saying something to her, but still, we don't know what. Some lurked in the shadows. Something else might have been protecting me. From a cloaked man in a hood without a face, to someone with an affinity for a certain room, as well as several other sightings in between, the Holy Family Parish Church in Maine is haunted with a lot of activities. The Stillwater Montessori School rented out 2 rooms and utilized a good part of the building for their interests. From 1990 to 1997, I went to this school. Its layout was fairly simple. The door to the school was the ones closest to the road. It opened up to a long hallway immediately in front and a hallway to the right. This right hallway was where the school resided. This shorter hallway on the right side had a classroom that we used as a dining room, then 2 classrooms, Terry's and Al's. Past those 3 rooms was a large open coat closet. Around the corner along the adjacent wall was a large kitchen with a few tables. On the left side, a catering hall across Terry's classroom, and bathrooms across the coat closet. The kitchen. In the large kitchen, something lurked. This room, us students weren't allowed to play in, and we used it only periodically, if the church needed our normal dining hall for an event, perhaps. I saw it lurking throughout the day. I always saw whatever this was through the half-length window of the closed door. It looked like a man with a head with long, dark hair. Every time I saw him, he walked past the door. I never saw a face. Being a curious, somewhat mischievous kid, I had to check to see who else was misbehaving. Often the door would be locked. I'd peek through the window and see no one inside the room. When the door was unlocked, I stepped inside. I wouldn't be greeted by anyone. The room was always empty. Well, it always looked empty. It didn't feel empty. It didn't sound empty. There was an authoritative energy in the room. It was strict and cold. I was a little nervous that if I stayed there for more than a minute, I'd get a good beating. The minimal moments I poked my whole body in the room, I could faintly hear dishes rattling by the sink, and a general mixing, cooking sounds. Sometimes we'd have to eat lunch in this room because our normal dining room was occupied. I was the only student not excited to eat my lunch here. Upon finding out that we'd be guests in this room, I'd dread it and lose my appetite. I wasn't the only one eating there, so that made it a little bit better, but I still didn't feel welcome. I'd constantly hear extra noises that didn't match students who were eating packed lunches. It was unsettling. I was always glad lunch was over in this room. The reception hall. The school used the catering hall for potlucks throughout the year. The potlucks would include a theater show put on by the students. The energy in this hall was somewhat ominous, due to the kitchen and bathrooms jutting out from an otherwise large rectangular room. There were 3 sections of this room: the open area in front of the bathrooms, the large area overlooking the kitchen, and the smaller area that faced the entrance. This smaller area had a dark corner where the paneling was different. It looked like a booth or nook that maybe a cash register might be placed. Behind the counter, there was a weird room and a closet that didn't feel right. Other than this section, light brown paneling, a suspended ceiling, and white-gray speckled vinyl adorned the room. In the center of the longest back wall hung a large crucifix between 2 large windows. There were 2 potlucks a year. Rehearsals took place in the hall on a makeshift stage between the 2 windows. This is where all the shows were performed. I always felt an audience of 2 extra people watching us. In the height of this feeling, whenever I'd look over by the kitchen wall directly across from where I was standing, I'd see a faint shadow of a man in a top hat. The man wasn't letting off a whole lot of emotions. He was just there, like an overseer, sending wide bits of compassion in a slightly ominous way. Meanwhile, over by the darker paneling, an angry energy lingered behind the shadows, invisible to the eye, but I could feel it, sorrowful anger looming. As long as I stood clear of this dark area and never ventured there alone, I knew I was safe. Midnight Mass at Christmas. Growing up, it was a tradition to go to midnight mass on Christmas. My Aunt Claire, my brother Josh, and I would nap in the evening and get up at 11 and head to mass. Often the church that would host the mass was the Holy Family Parish Church. One Christmas while I was in high school, probably 2003, we arrived at the church and entered the church by way of the main entrance overlooking the road. The three of us walked down the alley to sit in the pew that we wanted, towards the middle of the floor. We sat down as the mass went on. Eventually, I caught a glimpse of a man on the stage. Anger and confusion added to the overwhelming, gracious, peaceful Christmas atmosphere. He was wearing a black cloak. The hood was over his invisible head. It just stood there for a few seconds before it just turned around and disappeared behind a red curtain. Even though this hooded figure scared me, I never mentioned it to anyone. I knew it wouldn't be able to hurt me. Usually, all Catholic churches have some energy. None of the energy is anything like what looms here.